Hello everyone. Welcome to Codex Tech Rust Learning video blog. Today is the part 3 of Rust WASM Dioxus ToDo app. This will be the last part of this series and we will cover some of the lessons learned and some things about the Dioxus, some edge cases that I learned, and of course the future improvements that I can make in my next app for using WASM in Rust. I will be sticking to Dioxus for now, even my future apps, but I will be, of course, adding more dimensions to it instead of just the UI. I will try to add some API stuff in there too, using Axum probably. So I'll, we'll cover the same code that we have seen um, before, same app. So let's start with the first thing about um, stores and how to make updates to those stores. Um, so let me bring up the code and let's take a quick look at the store. So initially I created only one store because it's a simple application, so I thought it is okay to keep the username token and the task list of tasks that we're going to download from the API in one struct. It's called store. But later on, I discovered some issues that I will cover later in this video. That is about how the state is being updated and using some of the features in Dioxus like use state or use ref, etc. So that caused some issues, and I decided to move tasks to a different store, task store. So it will keep updating, those two things separate. And also, I had to implement this method. A few methods in the task are not just this one, but one is update task, and other one is adding a new task. Of course, it helps to keep them in one place because if I call it from multiple places, then I don't have to repeat the logic. But this is a simple application. I really did not need to put them in this struct, but because of the some refresh issues, how the WASM Dioxus app is working, this actually helped with the re-rendering issue. So if the state is changing, it did not re-render the same component. So these are pretty simple over here, like update task. We get the mutable self-reference and the values that we want to update. And then I am using the self.tasks.mutable iterator. So loop through it and try to find the task that we want to update. So we are passing the ID for that task. And if the task is found, then we just update the values. And if it is not found, we just show the message. Um, yeah, I think I tried to use the map before, but it did not work, especially like how to find the value and update the contents from the vector. So this was the best option I could use right now in the Rust. There are some cases where you get the mutable reference, but you cannot borrow it because it is behind the reference. So all those borrow checker issues. So this is the one option that worked out well for me. So this is the store, and it is used throughout the application, like in the home and other forms when we are adding new tasks or removing the tasks. So let's move on to the next topic. Um, so next one is about the links and using box leak um, in our code. So for that one, let's look at the code from. So I'll close this one. We don't need it. So let's go to the um, links and take a look at it. Like for first, let's take a look at the links, and then we can look at the router. So in Dioxus compared to U, um, there is no direct link between the enums and the actual path. So in if you watch U videos or you look at the documentation in U, you can use attributes to add the path to each enum. I liked that one better than this. I did not find the same option in Dioxus, but for my own purpose, I still created this enum. So this enum app route will list down all the routes for this application, home, create account, etc. And we can also list down some of the routes that will take some value, like when we are showing the details about a task or we want to edit the task, we want to pass the current ID. So this is also the Rust enum property that we use, and we can use further detail like ID or other attributes. We can add it to each enum value, and then I'm using this create routes method in the routes to create a route object that will have two. What is the path that we want to go to and which component to load. So if the two is coming to be create account, that means you want to load the create account. And then this is used in the links. So links is an atom that I have created, and this will be used to create the links on top of the screen, like home and edit task, etc. And what we are using here is a route path method. This is a local method, and here I'm using the enum. So if the if someone is passing route that I want to go to home, then it will translate it to the root. Create account will translate the create account. So these were simple. Um, One issue came up with the one task or edit task when we want to see one specific task detail or we want to edit a task. So we are passing an ID as I showed in the enum for the route. The problem was that we cannot create a string slice where we are using format to uh, add the ID to the path. So it will create the string, but it would require either we create as a string object, so we cannot use simple string reference. And there was no point of creating objects. So this is another feature in Rust. We can use box leak. Basically, we are saying that this will be a static string, and we know that it's gonna exist even once the class goes out of scope. But once the program finishes, it all will be cleaned up anyways. So that's why I decided to use box leak, and I'm returning a static string slice from this method route path, and then I can just use the string reference as is. So I don't think I needed the string object, and this was a good option, again, keeping the overall ergonomics for the API simpler. So this is about this links atom and the box leak and how we are using um, routes. Now let's move on to, let me close this one. I can close this one too. So let's move on to um, our next topic, and that will be about routes So this is about how to navigate from one route to another route. So we showed links, how we're using enums, how we're constructing the links, but next we will look into how Dioxus is using this route navigation and how do we pass the parameters we saw for added task and add task we need to pass an ID. So we will look into that next. So let's start with the router service. So in Dioxus, if we want to navigate from one page to another page, so for instance, example is the account form. So account form is used to create a new account, and when the user clicks on submit, so they will provide the username and password they want to store, and then on this screen, if I scroll down, so we have username, password, and then we have the submit link button. So if user clicks on submit, we want to use this username and password, create an account on the server side, and then we want to navigate back to the home page. So how that works is that if you see this line number 40, we need to use our current context, and then we call consume context, and there is something called router service. This is the object that we need to pull it out from Dioxus. I believe there were two different options how we get the router service, but this one seems cleaner to me, so I'm just using this one. So we consume context, and that means it can only be used inside the cx.render, so where you have the context already available. So we get the router service here on line number 40, and then I will go over some of the spawn later on, but then we are calling this router service dot push out on line number 62. So we are providing values like which route we want to navigate to and any extra parameters you want to pass with this method. Um, Again, this push route, since the internal method, probably if I was to rewrite and do the cleanup, I could wrap this method in my own custom method and use the enumeration. So instead of using this slash for the home, I would probably use the enumeration home value, and then internally I can map it and use the push route. Um, but that's for maybe feature cleanup or for the next project. So that's how we are using the router service and going from one page to another page. The next thing is how do we retrieve ID for, let's say, added task, or if you want to see the details of a task, how do we retrieve that ID from the path? So because path would be, added task slash task ID, like 1 to whatever the ID number is. So for that, we are using like on this line number 14. So there is something called use route, and we pass the current context, the scope, and the method parse segment. So we can parse the different segments of the URL. In this case, we know that we're gonna be passing the ID, so that will be a numeric value, integer value um, in our route. So I'm just using parse segment and then try to typecast to integer value ID. If it is successful, then we it is a valid ID and we can move forward. If it was the invalid URL, there's a string value or something, it will not convert. And for now, I just print the message. But in future, we could show an error message, and we can use the router service to navigate back to the home screen or error page or something. So that is about the route and path. One thing I want to mention that I is not covered before is the toOwned. So this is another macro provided by the Dioxus. What it allows you to do is to clone the value. Basically, you can either write username.clone, password.clone, router service.clone when you have to move any of these objects to the async method. So this is, I guess, just makes it little cleaner, less verbose. So instead of writing clone and creating object every time, you just use this macro, and internally, I think it is doing the same thing. So that is about the uh, router and the params. So next, let's look into the topic about the use ref, use state, and Fermi, that is the state management option in Dioxus. So for this one, let me navigate to the home screen because that one has most of these things already covered in just one place. So what we are doing in this case here is um, in the home screen, if I go back, I've used in multiple places, but home screen might be a good example. So use ref is preferred, like this line number 15, when you're passing some complex object, and use state is okay when it is a simpler object, let's say some integer value or probably string. That's the main difference between these two constructs. So I'm trying to use ref um, more often than uh, used it. And the other reason is there is something called write silent. So if I go to write silent, so this method is not available on the use state. So use ref provides this method, and what it helps with is avoid re-rendering the same UI. So if you have reference to this object and you change the value, but you don't want to re-render the UI, you want just to provide the value from the child component to parent component without re-rendering it, then write silent helps. Otherwise, it is possible that whenever the state changes in the child component, parent component for no reason will get rendered. So it just depends on the use case. So that was one extra advantage for using use ref. That's why I'm trying to stick to that one more often than not. Use read and use set. These are Fermi related methods. Use read is for reading the value from the Fermi, and the use set is for writing the value. Um, I'm still on the fence in future. Will I just stick to Fermi only, or I just use ref as well? Because there are some cases where it can get a little bit messy. For instance, right now, if you see here, I'm using task store to read and write. Uh, I could not find a method where we can get the editable reference. So it's not just read or set, but updatable reference to the task store. So I have to use two different variables. I did not see in the documentation if there is such a method, so I can get the reference one and I can read the value and also update. Um, so yeah, so this is how I had to do currently. There was no alternate option. And that was the reason I have to move it away from the App Store, because App Store I'm just creating for the read. If I uh, use the same for the task store, any change to task store will also cause this app store to show up as changed, although it was not changing. So yeah, so that was about the use ref, use state, state management, and Fermi in the Dioxus. Um, yeah, so let's move on to the next um, interesting topic, that is about initial component load. So right now in Dioxus there is no lifecycle hook which you can use to execute code only at the first time load of a component. Um, as per the some chat on their Discord channel, it seems like there is plan in future to add some lifecycle hook where you can write code that will only execute on the first load of the component. But since there is no such option, so I had to come up with my own implementation, and that's where I'm using this variable. If you see, is first render, so it is using Fermi, and first time I just set it to true, and then we once that Fermi atom using Fermi atom, that variable is created, then I'm using use atom state to read this one into this variable that is local to this home component is first render. Now we are using, if I so first time when the component loads, it will be true. So we will make any API call or whatever the initialization code we have to execute. It will run, and then I set it to false. So in for any reason, if a child component state is changed or whatever the other case might be, I don't want this component to re-render. So this will make sure that if I go on line number 26, we are checking is first render.get, and um, if it is true, then then this whole condition will return false, and we're not going to execute this code. But if it is false, then we will go is first render is false. So give me a second. So is first render, yeah, something is true and condition. So yeah, it's not a not. For some reason, I thought I'm using a not operator on this one. So no. So is first render is true, then we go and make initialization code. But once we change it to false, next time when we come to this line number 26, we'll try to get the value from the atom state. And since it is false, we'll not execute this whole block of the code. And that's how we are controlling the initialization. So in future, if that lifecycle hook is available, then that will simplify this code. We don't have to do it manually. We just put all this code that I have inside here for calling API and etc. It will just move into the lifecycle event. So that was one interesting thing that I learned in the Dioxus. And the last thing we will cover in this video is already quite long. So last thing we are covering in this video is about the use future versus the spawn. So these two options are used for making asynchronous calls. So if you see on this line number 27, we're using use future. So I believe spawn is available in U as well, and it may have the same functionality. So difference between spawn and use future is that use future will execute a block of code independent of any event. So for in this case, when the component is loading, there's no one triggering the event. So we want to call the use future, and then we are passing this async block, and I'm just calling this mock get task API. So if in real scenario, instead of this mock API, which is right now still creates a fake delay and it is an async method, so it will be easy to just replace it with some actual API call from our front end, and we do the await on it, and when the data is available, that is user task. So we are waiting on this user task variable, and then this is the option that this is the way we do it in Dioxus. We are keep checking what is the user task dot value. So if it is some value, mean the call has finished and data is available, then we do what we need to do in this first block. But if the value is none, then we can show any message. That means the async call is in progress and we want to show something. It could be a spinner component. In my case, I was just showing this loading message, and that spinner or loading component will be replaced with the actual contents when it is available. And this is handled by Dioxus by itself. Like it will call this user task value once the future has value available. Like first time when you use the user task, it will return none, but it will come back and call this match this line number 29 again, and that time we'll go into the this code block. Now about the spawn. So spawn is used, for instance, I'm using over here on the account form. So whenever a button is clicked or on a user action, if you want to call some API code, some async method, so this is where the spawn helps. So cx.spawn, so we're using a scope and we use a spawn method, and then we can have just similar to the future, we can have an async block. So in this case, I'm just calling this mock create account API, and then it functionality wise, then it is the same. So one is based on the user trigger, other one is that will trigger automatically either on the page load if you have to do some kind of operations. So that's where the use feature is used, or that's how I understood from the documentation. After that, once the spawn has make the API call, because it will be still async, so we call this await, and then we just wait for this message, either it is the create account or the login, and it is coming into the success variable. So it's just going to wait on this line. Once we get the results, if it is not empty, in my case, I'm showing like, okay, account was verified, and we want to navigate to the next screen. But if it comes empty, in my case, I'm returning empty. It could be a different kind of validation from the API, could be some error code or something. So that can be checked here. And then appropriately, either we show the navigate to the home route or go to error page, whatever we want to do, that can be done inside the spawn and using the router service as I explained in the beginning. Yeah, so that covers almost everything that I wanted to cover and discuss about my learning about the Dioxus for this simple to-do app. And before we, I guess, wrap it up, so I'll just go over this application again. So we have it running now. Only if I can find. Give me a second. So there it is. So we have create account. Last time I believe we did not go over this one, but this is the create account page and the login. They're the same form, just change the label. Right now I can just type anything. I am not validating, so it will take me to the home screen. So if you did not get a chance to um, see the message, so if I just type some random thing, if I click submit, you will see the loading message. That could be a spinner as well, like usually people do in the React or Angular, show a spinner component. So loading, and then when the API call is finished, it will replace that with the table. So this is the future we talked about, and on the top you can see we got the message that who is the user that has logged in. So all this is being handled. We can go to the details. This is all the navigation that we talked about, like edit. So you just use the route service to move around, and if I click on this one, route service will route me back to the home screen. So that is it for this to-do app overview discussion, and also sharing some topics that I learned while I was using Dioxus. I will continue building more WASM and Dioxus apps, and I will post future videos about them. My next plan, my plan right now is in the next video series, I will try to use the XM. So I will still use the Dioxus, but it will cover mostly the backend part and build some API with a very simple UI. So it's not going to be this kind of a Dioxus app where there are tasks and you have navigation. It will be very simple. But the goal of that series would be to connect WASM Dioxus with the actual backend API instead of mocking. So that will be the next video series, and uh, I hope to see you all in the next video series when we cover that one. Uh, and if you have any comment, please share in the comment section. And thanks for watching.